Good afternoon. My colleague Jill Fannin, how many people here know Jill Fannin? Yeah, all right. My colleague Jill Fannin once said that if you didn't know better, you would think that Richard North Patterson is the Forrest Gump of the literary world. After all, he's found himself at the center of most of the major debates of our time. Abortion, gun control, domestic violence, presidential politics, capital punishment, oil dependence, human rights, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that's just a few of them. But unlike Forrest Gump, Rick Patterson is not a hapless wanderer. He seeks out these difficult contemporary controversies as settings for his novels. He goes to the places where people disagree. He weaves engrossing stories and compelling characters on all sides of a controversy. And he grabs our heads and our hearts to help us understand the world better and to understand each other. No wonder he's had 14 consecutive New York Times bestsellers. Or is it 15 now? I don't know. How many? 16. 16. But who's counting? And national and international literary prizes, too numerous to recount. Now, I'm sure that most of you know that Rick Patterson did not start off as an author. Instead, he started his career, like most of the people in this room, as a lawyer. He started with the Attorney General's office in Ohio. He was with the Securities and Exchange Commission. And then he came to the Bay Area here, to the law firm in San Francisco of McCutcheon, Doyle, Brennan, Henderson. And that's where I met Rick. He and I started at McCutcheon within a month of each other, back in the 1980s, and we worked together on many cases. And I can say without question that his briefs were unique. As you might expect from an already acclaimed writer and Edgar Allan Poe Award winner, there was no staid legal prose for Rick Patterson. His briefs wove stories. They used colorful language. They shook up the reader. I will tell you, he was good. Too good, I might add, for law practice. So no wonder he ended up eventually writing novels full-time. But full-time for Rick is really full-time plus. Because in addition to publishing 19 novels, he's found time for community service. He's served on the boards of the National Partnership for Women and Families, the Family Violence Prevention Fund, the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, and is chairman of Common Cause, among others. Now, Rick Patterson didn't really leave the law behind when he left the law firm behind. His novels are woven with legal themes or are set against the backdrop of courtroom drama. He skillfully uses the adversarial process itself as a way to showcase the complex political and social issues of our time. For lawyers like us, his books are irresistible. But what I love most about Rick's novels is not so much the legal side as the human side. He can take a complex issue, like abortion, or the death penalty, or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and make us feel it. It's not that he dumbs it down. He doesn't. To the contrary, Rick's books are extensively and painstakingly researched and accurate to a fault. And believe me, I know. When I was an appellate lawyer, Rick and I worked through the federal rules of appellate procedure to make sure that the abortion case in Protect and Defend could actually make it to the Supreme Court in time for the plot to work. Rather, Rick creates characters with depth and dignity on both sides of divisive issues, forcing us to grapple with the many ways of looking at the world, the many ways that being human is just complicated. His most recent work takes him and us into family dynamics with all the depth that we've come to love in his more legal and political work. He is a modern-day storyteller who dares to explore serious issues in the world and in our lives. Please welcome Richard North Patterson.
Well, this is really fun for me. It's great to come out here and discover Barry and Leslie, my former partners as judges. No one ever wanted to make me a judge, so I had to find some more drastic means to draw attention to myself. So I'm very grateful to be here. It's particularly nice to be talking to this audience, not only because we share a common profession, but because so many of you have been kind enough to read my books. So I want to thank you not only on my behalf, but on behalf of all 5 of my kids. As I often remark, when people ask why I'm so prolific, novelistically that is, I say that alimony and tuition are a real inspiration in one's art. I'm also grateful to be here because I wasn't exactly counting on this kind of attention at the beginning of my writing career, when the publication of my first novel rocketed me from unknown to obscure almost overnight. The Last Tangent was what one might call an instant rare book. My hardcover publisher printed 5,000 copies, and many with 35 pages missing, creating somewhat more of a mystery than I strictly intended. And I learned how easy it is to hide a printing of 5,000 copies from a populace of 250 million people. Well, when I asked my paperback publisher if we could print a few more copies, she answered, "We're going to tease them a little." To which I responded, "Can't we at least try foreplay?" She was not amused. Then there was this case tonight in which I resolved to write some truly authoritative sex scenes, and the only one who noticed was my mom. This is true. When the book appeared, she called and said, "Well, I liked your novel." They're detecting a certain tone of maternal reserve, shall we say. I said, what's wrong, Mom?" "Nothing really," she replied. "I just wonder why that couple," referring to the male and female protagonists, "made love so much." "Gee, Mom," I told her, "I didn't think they made love that much. To me, they're just a typical urban couple." Well, she was so alarmed by that revelation that for the next 6 months, whenever she'd bring me up, she'd say, "Is this a good time to call?" And when I finally had a great success with Degree of Guilt, I faced a new challenge explaining to interviewers why a group they perceived to be as untalented, unimaginative, and unlikable as American lawyers was drawing such an audience. There are a number of possible explanations, some of them less attractive than others, but I finally found the correct response. Can you possibly imagine a television series entitled The Young Accountants? Anyhow, here I am, extraordinarily lucky and deeply appreciative for all of that. It just goes to show if you live long enough, anything can happen. And it surely proves that when Scott Fitzgerald said, "There are no second acts in American lives," he was dead wrong. So I'm all the more grateful that my work involves one of the most important ingredients of a civilized society, the written word, the work of disparate people from countless different backgrounds, which nonetheless illuminates our common humanity. For good writing helps us cross the artificial lines of race, gender, age, social class, sexuality, and nationality, not only entertaining us hopefully, but enabling us to imagine a more compassionate self in a kinder world, and to contribute to that in any way, no matter how small, is a privilege. But to me, a particularly important truth is I'm here not in spite of our profession, but because of it. So while I don't want to encourage unduly any of you to start writing books, I feel obliged to reveal one truth, that litigation really is basic training for novelists. I mean, that isn't because, despite what our nastier critics might suggest, that I've mastered the art of making stuff up before I'd written a line of fiction. But consider what litigators must do to be any good at all. Investigation and research, mastering not only the facts, but new bodies of knowledge and expertise. Narrative, wresting all this into a coherent story with a conclusion that actually makes sense. Characterization and psychology, understanding human complexity so that you can tell your client's story to other human beings with beliefs and complications of their own. Writing in a clear and compelling way, as Barry or Leslie could tell you, engaging the interests of America's most tired and cynical audience judges and their law clerks. Add to this a great setting where clients tell you the damnedest things, surprise waits in ambush, and the truth of character and events is revealed in the most unexpected ways. Moral and ethical complexity, where the search for truth is balanced by concern for systemic fairness, as represented by the rules of evidence in our system of constitutional rights. A social crucible, an area which can address the great issues of our times, from Brown versus Board of Education to Roe versus Wade and beyond. These are wonderful tools for a novelist, but they are also, for the most part, morally neutral. So I want to stress how some of the most admirable aspects of our profession serve the work of a novelist, and how these same attributes should temper the poisonous contention that now threatens our social fabric as a whole. We know what lawyers look like at their worst: deceptive, dishonest, mindlessly contentious, skilled in obfuscating or concealing the truth, closed to any argument, contrary to perceived interest, and completely without scruples in advancing their agenda. These lawyers are sometimes called by other names, like candidate. But look at who we are supposed to be, and in most cases are. Curious, open to argument and new information, intellectually honest, devoted to our clients, but also to the rule of law, dedicated to protecting the rights of all, and mindful that we serve the interests of our society rather than society existing to serve us. This is the spirit in which I've tried to address such subjects as abortion, the death penalty, and the Israeli-Palestinian tragedy. I don't always make everyone happy. That's the lot of lawyers and novelists alike. I hope I've treated these subjects as the complex things they truly are, factually, morally, and emotionally. That's my obligation as I see it, and to fulfill it, I sought out people on every side of these questions. That's the spirit of the lawyer. And it's time we brought that spirit to the broken political process, which I believe threatens to turn this country into the decline of Rome with that special touch of Paraguay. Start with how we speak to and about each other. A coarsening of our public dialogue that isolates groups of citizens from each other, shriveling our empathy, imagination, and sense of common purpose, while reducing our institutions to instruments of partisan warfare, bent on promoting chosen interests at the expense of others. For there is simply no escaping the mindless divisiveness of contemporary American politics, the insidious rule of a mass media that often prefers profit over truth, and the domination of our campaigns by a marketing mentality so soulless that it invites contempt and disbelief. These themes hardly exhaust our problems. There are so many, it is difficult to choose among them. Those which leap most easily to mind include the threat of terrorism, our sometimes misguided response, a fiscal crisis where we parked our debt in China, and the growing educational and financial gulf among our citizens in the face of economic challenge. Well, running through each of these problems is the cynicism of modern politics, which turns Americans against each other and erodes a common commitment to the common good. Whatever my personal beliefs, I'm appalled by partisanship run amok, where politics means prejudice and policy yields to glibness and dishonesty. Historically, our president and other elected officials won elections by seeking consensus and enlisting the support of those in the political center. But too often our modern political strategies follow a very different model, turning out supporters with a fixed point of view, demonize those fellow citizens who support the other side, and persuade those in the middle through negative campaigning that our electoral system is way too toxic to care about. As we have seen quite recently, this degraded public dialogue that created a polish of bitterness, where news outlets exist to perpetuate prejudice, not enlightenment, and where political leaders don't engage in opposing ideas, but rather villainize those who voice them. In this new politics of disparagement, division, and distrust, the expectation of cultural differences and social anxiety has become a surrogate for addressing the very real problems that we as Americans face in common. Never mind a much least divide is based on the parity of one side or the other. And the truth or fairness, as we know in lawyers, is seldom the property of any one party. In the echo chamber of modern politics, far too candidates and commentators have figured out they can appeal to our fears by repeating the same lies and exaggerations until they become accepted truth. They will never have to seriously address the wealth gap, the health gap, the loss of jobs, the failure of our schools, the decline of opportunity, and the dawn of a new gilded age where our wealthy few increasingly enjoy privileges reminiscent of the late 19th century. Through this grotesque oversimplification of American society, millions of Americans have become a political lab experiment in discussion of a coherent public policy which addresses the common good. It has been replaced by a nation filled with people who increasingly see the other as the enemy of the America they imagine. Equally damaging are civic debates infected with lies, deceptions, and half-truths, ignoring Senator Pat Moynihan's famous dictum that we're entitled to our own opinions, but not to our own facts. This witch's brew of fraudulence, ignorance, and distaste can destroy our society as effectively as any foreign enemy. It is contrary to everything that we, as lawyers, are taught to believe and understand, including that compromise is not a dirty word. Then there's all of the almost equally great can-be of this decline of our public life. The exploitation of false or irrelevant charges, often about private conduct, to destroy public careers. The current tendency to cheapen our discourse with personal attacks will, like the slow dripping of water on a stone, erode our own collective sense of decency and compassion, even as it deprives us of good men and women of excellent public character. Martin Luther King was an adulterer, after all. He made our country far better than it was. A glance at our own news outlets reveals how far the media diverge from the ideals our profession teaches. Increasingly, our purveyors of news occupy niches in which the written or spoken word is meant to confirm our settled biases, persuading us that the politicians or media with a different point of view are peopled by degenerates, charlatans, or liars. For a society that is bombarded with so much alleged news, too little of it encourages empathy for people and problems outside our own direct experience, or any interest in ideas than those other than those which keep us from entertaining new ideas. A look at the New York Times bestseller list for nonfiction in a given week confirms this. The most successful books about politics are usually the literary equivalent of a food fight, waged by propagandists who profit by spattering their targets with calumny intended to foreclose thought, not to promote thought. And so our society increasingly lives in gated communities of the mind. We can't afford this any longer. We face a time of national peril unique in our history, including a gradual erosion of security for ordinary Americans, which could, over time, spell the end of the expanding opportunity which was the hallmark of 20th century America for so many. We have done better before, and we can do better again. But to do so, we must rise above this cacophony of meanness and regard each other with compassion, goodwill, and humility to know that all of us have so much more to learn about each other. That is part of what we begin to learn as lawyers. Another tenet of the law is that every citizen is entitled to justice, including a good defense and access to the courts. We understand this ideal will never be perfectly realized. Whether or not we believe in it definitely, all of us know capital cases that serve as cautionary tales. But like all imperfect beings, we are dedicated to helping the system we serve and participate in be better than it is. Contrast this aspiration to the role of money in our electoral process. Sadly, the way we finance our political campaigns is little better than an elegant form of bribery, in which all citizens' votes are supposed to count equally, but some citizens' voices are much louder than others. It's bad enough that our candidates are forced to spend countless hours raising money or courting lobbyists to raise the bundles, giving them a place at the table when laws are drafted and policies are set. Worse, as a matter of law, special interests are now deemed to have the same rights as citizens under the First Amendment, enabling them to spend millions in undisclosed dollars to promote political causes often through grossly deceptive advertising. This ignores what is obvious to anyone familiar with life in Washington or any state cabinet, that money not only buys access, but also often buys outcomes that change our daily lives. The unspoken principle seems to be that the law should help the most powerful interests in our society counterbalance the powerless effects of letting ordinary people vote. Even George Orwell became president. To some, this may sound harsh, but instead of our profession ennobling politics, the demands of partisan politics have been raiding the courts, often shrouded by political philosophies that serve a political agenda. On this count, I must confess to a certain amusement when some of our current justices claim fidelity to the original intent of framers who denied the franchise to women, who included men who, whatever their manifest virtues, owned and sometimes slept with their slaves, and who collectively would have been perplexed by the very thought of an assemblage as open and diverse as this one today. To me, one might as well assume that all scientific thought stopped before Newton, Darwin, and Einstein, or that Edmund Burke, the great conservative thinker who believed in organic change, is now unfit to read. I sometimes suspect that deploying framers' intent is just another way for judges to inflict their own political and social biases. In 1954, for example, it would have been all too easy to ignore the massive contemporary knowledge showing the damage done by segregated schools, simply by suggesting that the decision in Brown versus Board of Education was never contemplated by Thomas Jefferson. Fortunately, that was not an argument in 1954. But does anyone truly doubt that it would come up now? This concern is not a matter simply of conservative versus liberal. Whether the decision at issue is Casey versus Planned Parenthood or Citizens United, the country loses when our citizens believe that the law has devolved into politics by other means. When the Supreme Court appears to be an agent of the most partisan forces in our politics, and justice is seen to be nominated to carry out their agenda, whatever their coy disclaimers before the partisan attack dogs of the Judiciary Committee, it erodes the credibility of all courts. It is one thing to have a judicial philosophy which guides the judges' appraisal of the law. That's a good thing. But when a closed mind and a rigid political ideology are prerequisites to the appointment of a justice to our highest court, something very precious is lost. Yet more and more of our judicial aspirants on the federal level and for the highest courts advance their prospects by aligning with groups of ideological nature that believe that our legal system is just another instrument for imposing our political and social beliefs on their fellow citizens. It is not for nothing that the media now covers the decisions of federal judges by routinely noting the president who appointed them. And God help us when the spirit of Citizens United infects the election of state judges across the nation, as it already has in some instances, allowing corporations to advertise in support or opposition to jurors who pass on their cases. It's bad enough that we do this to our politicians. It's unacceptable to do it to the good people who sacrifice to serve on the courts. I realize that this is not, one might say, strictly a feel-good speech. I get that. But I offer this critique because I feel good about you all as lawyers, the principles you embrace, the crucial role you play in the society as a whole, in your commitment to serving a legal system which is free from politics or passion as we can possibly make it. Many countries are, or purport to be, democracies. Very few have a legal system whose history is as pivotal or as principled as ours. Through your example, your advocacy, and your dedication to the rule of law, it falls to you as lawyers to preserve that. And then whatever else, this special institution which we serve, the American judiciary and legal system, will inspire and protect the next generations of men and women alike. Thank you.